Okay, I intend this one to be very much to the point. Um, as it stands, assessments of Theresa May are generally negative, and honestly, with the most generous will in the world, much of that is deserved. Um, although I do think her own party didn't exactly make things easy for her. It was pointed out to me by a Leave supporting friend, acquaintance, that she appointed a cabinet of Leave people, and she, I think, as he put it, she let them down. I tend to veer more towards the view that if they had accepted her proposals, if they'd accepted her bills for withdrawal, um, imperfect as they were, we would have been out of the EU by now. So, politics is never about getting exactly what you want. And the hardline Brexiteers' utter refusal to have any sort of compromise whatsoever, I think, has led to this prolonged state that we're in. So I don't think that's entirely Theresa May's fault. Although, as Vince Gable pointed out, if you keep trying the same thing and it keeps failing, then something is not right with that. Okay, I don't want to have a total assessment of her premiership here. I'll be doing that later on. But I want to talk about one very specific issue. I think a lot of the criticism of May is deserved. She's not going to go down as a great prime minister. And honestly, she's probably the worst prime minister of my lifetime in terms of lack of getting anything done. It's very difficult to see. I mean, even a polarizing figure like Thatcher, who some people love, some people hate, you couldn't say she was insignificant. You couldn't say Tony Blair was insignificant. Theresa May has had a very challenging time, and it's difficult to point to anything that she really achieved. I'm sure there will be things, you know, um, in our 24-hour media cycle. I'm sure there are things that, for example, there was more focus on mental health in her time in office. There was more, perhaps, money put into the NHS in that regard, things like that. And the average person doesn't tend to look at things like that. I think media is more cynical than optimistic, and that is very true when it comes to assessing politicians. A lot of that is fair, but some of it is very one sided. Now, with Theresa May, I was thinking about her 3 years in office, and what big thing stands out for me as being what I would say is her stronger moment as Prime Minister. For me, that's very clear. The answer is very obvious, and I'm surprised this hasn't been mentioned. And it's this: standing up to Russia last year. I think this is a very, very important thing. When the Russian state decided to attempt to poison a man on our soil, leading to the deaths of two British civilians, that was an act of Russian state aggression. They added insult to injury by denying it, by insulting us, by even laughing about it, um, trolling us on the embassy blog, or at least trying to, and then getting their mouthpiece RT to churn out lies and propaganda, which they've been doing for years anyway. And as if it wasn't already clear, I despise RT. Okay, let me just put that on record. Now, Theresa May's response to that was resolute, it was tough, and she didn't mess around. Within weeks of the incident happening, Russian personnel had been forced to leave the country, diplomats. I believe that was the right decision to make. It's unfortunate it came to that. It's unfortunate that Putin's thug regime put us in that position, but they did. And the May government's response was absolutely justified. And I think anyone who really cares about this country needs to recognise that. Whatever you think of Theresa May as a Prime Minister, whatever you think of her position on the EU and Brexit, and I accept there's a lot of criticism of that, the way she handled the Salisbury affair, I feel, showed leadership. It showed toughness. Now, it might be the only thing that stands out in her premiership, but it's a big one. And I give her credit for that. And actually, given that Boris Johnson was Foreign Secretary at the time, he's been dismissed as a lackluster, lousy Foreign Secretary. Well, his statements on the British woman held in Iran did not help matters. But he was Foreign Secretary at the time when we showed a tough resolve to Russia. So perhaps he also deserves credit there. Gavin Williamson deserves credit for being robust on both Russia and China, and it was a disgrace that he was then kind of fed to the wolves a few weeks ago. In fact, I'm surprised he hasn't thrown his name into the ring yet for this leadership contest. Anyway, I'm going to round this up soon, but I strongly believe that Russia has an agenda of subverting and undermining Western democracy. I think it is abundantly clear. I don't care what the Mueller report says, because there is abundance of other examples of Russia's behavior in this regard. And actually, about the Mueller report, I haven't got around to making a video specifically on this. Trump supporters are rushing to say, oh, it's cleared the president. No, it hasn't. All it's done is provided redacted information. You know, there hasn't been a time really for Congress to pore over that and to look at what that really entails. So I don't believe that the president's cleared yet. Um, I mean, at the very least, the fact that Putin is the only foreign leader that Trump hesitates to denigrate surely should, raise question marks. In fact, come to think about it, he refuses to insult Xi Jinping either. I'm not saying he should, by the way, but when he, insults Western allies and seems to cozy up to foreign autocrats, you have to wonder about that. Only the most hardline Trump supporter can't see that as being at least a little bit suspicious. So I believe that there is absolutely a situation going on here, frankly, akin to what was going on in the Cold War. And the Cold War was even more straightforward because at least there was a hotline between London and Moscow, between Washington and Moscow. Now there is no such thing. We have this media war going on. We have the toxic influence of RT distorting the truth. It's not that they make outright lies, but they distort the truth and they push basically the policies of the Russian foreign ministry. It's absolutely, absolutely obvious. And I have to be honest, I was utterly disgusted last year when I saw so many of my fellow citizens lining up to make excuses for Putin. That they could be so blinded to what was happening that they would actually advocate the propaganda of a hostile foreign state and make out the British like we were the ones in the wrong, like it was an inside job with zero evidence for that claim. It absolutely disgusted me. I mean, even if Russia was innocent of that, and I don't believe they were, there is plenty of other things going on to, cast a damning indictment of the Putin regime. So I think May was right to be tough on that. I think she could have been tougher on China. I'm not happy with this Huawei situation, not at all. So I think she could have been more vocal on that. On issues like CGTN and RT, I understand the government doesn't have the final say on that, but I think the government can be more outspoken. Um, it's good that so I give May credit for standing up to Russia, but she frankly has been too much of a pushover when it comes to China. We need to be far more assertive of Beijing's agenda as well, because right now they may not be working together, but Moscow and Beijing have an absolute obvious agenda of undermining Western democracies. It's so obvious. So I give May credit for that. I just wish she'd been as assertive on China. And if Prime Minister Hunt or Prime Minister Johnson or Prime Minister Raab or Prime Minister Gove or whoever it is gets in, I want to see them also being strong on China. That to me would be real leadership, standing up to the world's second biggest economy and the bullying dragon. That would be a good thing.